In Deuteronomy 18:20, God declares, "The prophet who speaks a word presumptuously in my name, which I have not commanded him to speak, that prophet shall die." So, if someone claims to be a prophet but delivers a revelation that doesn't really come from God, he's a false prophet, according to Deuteronomy 18:20. In the History of At-Tabari, Volume 6, page 111, Muhammad confesses, "I have fabricated things against God and have imputed to him words which he has not spoken." So, Muhammad, who claimed to be a prophet, admitted that he delivered a revelation that didn't really come from God. If both of these passages are correct, party's over, Muslims. Your prophet was a fraud, a fake, a phony. Hence, if you want to believe that Muhammad was a true prophet, you either have to reject Deuteronomy 18:20, or you have to reject Muhammad's claim that he delivered a revelation that didn't come from God, or you have to reject both. Let's see how these escape routes are going to work out for you. We'll begin with Deuteronomy 18:20. The verse reads, "But the prophet who speaks a word presumptuously in my name, which I have not commanded him to speak, or which he speaks in the name of other gods, that prophet shall die." Here we have two ways of spotting a false prophet. If someone claims that a revelation comes from God, but it doesn't actually come from God, he's a false prophet. Or if he speaks in the name of other gods, he's a false prophet. Now, why should Muslims believe that delivering a false revelation and speaking in the name of other gods are signs of a false prophet? I can think of at least three reasons. First, these criteria seem intuitively obvious. It just makes sense to think that if a person promotes polytheism or says, "Here's a revelation that comes from God," and it's not from God, that person isn't a true prophet. If you want to reject these criteria, you have to say that a true prophet can promote polytheism or deliver revelations that don't really come from God, and that would seem like a pretty strange view. If even true prophets can speak in the name of other gods and deliver false revelations, how would we know when to believe them? Second, while many Muslims today believe that the Torah has been corrupted, the Quran and Muhammad consistently affirm the inspiration, preservation, and authority of the Torah. The Quran affirms the inspiration of the Torah in Surah 3, verses 3 to 4. "He, Allah, has revealed to you the book with truth, verifying that which is before it, and He revealed the Torah and the Gospel aforetime, a guidance for mankind, and He revealed the criterion." So Allah gave the Torah as a guidance for mankind. Contrary to charges of corruption, the Quran asserts that no one can change Allah's words. Surah 18, verse 27. "And recite what has been revealed to you of the book of your Lord. There is none who can alter his words, and you shall not find any refuge besides him." In Surah 5, verse 43, some Jews come to Muhammad to settle a dispute. Allah responds, "Why do they come to you for judgment, O Muhammad, when they have the Torah before them, wherein is the judgment of Allah? Yet they turn back after that, and these are not the believers." So, according to the Quran, Jews don't need Muhammad or the Quran because they have the Torah. This makes no sense if the Torah was corrupted. The historical background of Surah 5, verse 43 is found in Sunan Abu Dawud 4449. The judge of a dispute would sit on a special cushion. Watch what happens when Muhammad sits down to judge. "They set out a cushion for the messenger of Allah, and he sat on it. Then he said, 'Bring me the Torah.' It was brought, and he took the cushion from beneath him and placed the Torah on it and said, 'I believe in you and in the one who revealed you.'" Not only does Muhammad speak to a copy of the Torah and say that he believes in it, which would be strange if he thought that it had been corrupted, he also puts the Torah on the judgment cushion. What's the takeaway message? Muhammad's not the judge. The Torah's the judge. This goes far beyond confirming the initial inspiration of the Torah 2,000 years earlier. Muhammad confirms the Torah in the hands of the Jewish community of his own time. And Deuteronomy 18:20 was in the Torah of Muhammad's time. So Muhammad and the Quran affirm the inspiration, preservation, and authority of the Torah. Muslims who reject Deuteronomy 18:20 are therefore rejecting Muhammad and the Quran. But it gets even better, because in Surah 7, verse 157, Allah claims, "Those who follow the messenger, the unlettered prophet, whom they find written down with them in the Torah and the Gospel, it is they who will prosper. Notice that according to this verse, Jews and Christians still have the Torah and the Gospel. Even more confirmation that the Torah hasn't been corrupted. But the verse also says that we find Muhammad mentioned in the Torah and the Gospel, and this has led nearly 14 centuries of Muslims to search for prophecies of Muhammad in the Torah and the Gospel. After nearly 14 centuries of searching, what's the most popular so-called prophecy of Muhammad in the Torah? A prophecy used by Zakir Naik and Shabir Ali and Jamal Badawi and Ahmed Deedat. It's the prophecy about the coming of a prophet like Moses, a prophecy found in, you guessed it, Deuteronomy 18. Deuteronomy 18 is the foundation of Islam's argument from biblical prophecy, used by Muslim apologists around the world to prove that Muhammad was a true prophet. The popular Brief Illustrated Guide to Understanding Islam uses Deuteronomy 18 as its primary evidence that the Bible predicts the coming of Muhammad. Author I.A. Ibrahim states, "The biblical prophecies on the advent of the Prophet Muhammad are evidence of the truth of Islam for people who believe in the Bible. In Deuteronomy 18, Moses stated that God told him, 'I will raise up for them a prophet like you from among their brothers. I will put my words in his mouth, and he will tell them everything I command him. If anyone does not listen to my words that the prophet speaks in my name, I myself will call him to account.'" Deuteronomy 18, 18-19. Now, if Muslim apologists around the world are quoting this passage to show that Muhammad was a prophet of God, they obviously regard it as inspired. And if they're granting the inspiration of Deuteronomy 18, verses 18 through 19, they obviously can't deny the very next verse, Deuteronomy 18, verse 20. So, from an Islamic perspective, Deuteronomy 18:20 is unassailable. And Deuteronomy 18:20 gives us two criteria for spotting a false prophet. If someone speaks in the names of other gods, he's a false prophet. If he delivers a false revelation, he's a false prophet. Interestingly, Muhammad did both when he delivered the infamous satanic verses. We learn about the satanic verses not from Jewish or Christian sources, but from early Muslim writings. Let's read a passage from the History of At-Tabari to see what happened. The History of At-Tabari, Volume 6, page 108. "When the messenger of God saw how his tribe turned their backs on him and was grieved to see them shunning the message he had brought to them from God, he longed in his soul that something would come to him from God which would reconcile him with his tribe. With his love for his tribe and his eagerness for their welfare, it would have delighted him if some of the difficulties which they had made for him could have been smoothed out, and he debated with himself and fervently desired such an outcome. Then God revealed, 'By the star when it sets, your comrade does not err, nor is he deceived, nor does he speak out of his own desire.'" That's the beginning of Surah 53 of the Quran. "And when he came to the words, 'Have you thought upon Alat, Alusa, and Manat, the third, the other,' that's verses 19 through 20 of Surah 53, Satan cast on his tongue, because of his inner debates and what he desired to bring to his people, the words, 'These are the high-flying cranes. Verily their intercession is accepted with approval.'" That last part was originally the next verse of Surah 53. Alat, Aluza, and Manat were three pagan goddesses. When Surah 53 was revealed, the Quran called them the high-flying cranes, whose intercession is accepted with approval, meaning that Alat, Aluza, and Manat were like birds that could carry your prayers to Allah. Muhammad bowed down in honor of this revelation, and as usual, his followers bowed down with him. But the polytheists were so delighted that Muhammad had finally approved of their gods, they joined in and prostrated themselves because of the reference to their gods which they had heard, so that there was no one in the mosque, believer or unbeliever, who did not prostrate himself. So the pagans were bowing down in worship with Muhammad and his followers because Muhammad and the Quran had shown respect for their goddesses. But Muhammad's friendly relations with the polytheists didn't last long. He soon learned that his verses praising pagan goddesses didn't come from Allah, they came from Satan. Gabriel visited Muhammad and said, "Muhammad, what have you done? You have recited to the people that which I did not bring to you from God, and you have said that which was not said to you." This is the angel Gabriel telling Muhammad that he delivered a revelation that didn't come from God. Saddened to recognize his treachery against Allah, Muhammad lamented, "I have fabricated things against God and have imputed to him words which he has not spoken." So both Gabriel and Muhammad plainly state that Muhammad meets the criteria of a false prophet in Deuteronomy 18:20. Muhammad remained grief-stricken and anxious until the revelation of the verse, "Never did we send a messenger or a prophet before you," to the words, "God is knower, wise." Let's read the entire verse to see how Allah comforted Muhammad after Muhammad humiliated himself by advocating shirk. The verse reads, "Never did we send a messenger or a prophet before you, but when he recited the revelation or narrated or spoke, Satan threw some falsehood in it. But Allah abolishes that which Satan throws in. Then Allah establishes his revelations, and Allah is all-knower, all-wise." So Allah tells Muhammad, don't feel bad about delivering a revelation from the devil. All of Allah's messengers deliver a revelation from the devil from time to time. But don't worry about it because Allah eventually cleans up the mess. The next verse explains why Allah allows Satan to trick and deceive his messengers. That he, Allah, may make what is thrown in by Satan a trial for those in whose hearts is a disease and whose hearts are hardened. Are you getting this? Allah lets Satan deliver false revelations through Allah's true prophets in order to test people. Notice that we're not just talking about a story from later Muslim sources. Quran verses were revealed in response to the satanic verses. And yet most Muslims claim that Muhammad never delivered the satanic verses and that the story was made up. The problem is that there are tons of sources reporting various versions of this story. I have 37 Muslim sources reporting the satanic verses affair, and these sources can be traced back to some very important early Muslims. Of the 37 sources we have for this story, 6 go back to Ka'b al-Kharazi, one of Islam's greatest early Quran scholars. 5 go back to Urwa ibn al-Zubair, an early Meccan scholar who's known as the founder of the study of the life of Muhammad. He was also Aisha's nephew, Abu Bakr's grandson, and the son of Abu Bakr's daughter Asma. 2 go back to Abu Bakr ibn Abdul Rahman ibn al-Harith, one of the top scholars in Islamic law during the 1st century. 5 go back to Abu al-Aliya al-Basri, another of the greatest Quran scholars of the 1st century. He studied the Quran with Caliph Umar, Ubay ibn Ka'b, Zayd ibn Thabit, and Ibn Abbas. 2 go back to al-Sudi, another early scholar who studied with Ibn Abbas. 1 comes from the tafsir of Muhammad ibn al-Sa'ib al-Kalbi, an early commentator who composed the longest tafsir that had been written up until his time. 4 reports go back to Qatada ibn Diama, one of Islam's greatest early commentators. 1 goes back to al-Dahak ibn Muzahim al-Balki, a 1st century expert in tafsir. 1 goes back to Ikramah, a slave of Ibn Abbas and an expert on the life of Muhammad. We have 6 reports that go back to Ibn Abbas himself, the founder of Quran studies, and we have several that go back to Sa'id ibn Jubair, one of the leading Quran scholars of his time and one of the top students of Ibn Abbas. Some of Ibn Abbas's narratives go through Sa'id ibn Jubair. So this story is all over the early Muslim community. How did so many Muslim scholars get this completely wrong? As a general rule, if you're going to make up stories about your prophet, you're going to make up positive stories. You're going to make up stories about him performing miracles or something. You're not going to make up stories about him delivering revelations from the devil. Here, some Muslim who's desperate to defend Muhammad will say, but Muslims didn't make up the story. Jews made up the story. And we can only reply, seriously? That's your explanation? Some Jews made up a story about Muhammad delivering a revelation from the devil, and Muslims believed it and put it in dozens of early sources? Do you really not understand what the early Muslim community would have done to Jews who were making up stories about Muhammad delivering revelations from Satan? The only way Muslim historians would have recorded such an embarrassing story is that they knew it was true and couldn't deny it. And we can see how embarrassing it was to Muslims because as time goes on, the story gets watered down more and more. The earliest versions of the story say that Muhammad delivered the satanic verses. Later versions say that Satan simply imitated Muhammad's voice so that people thought Muhammad delivered the satanic verses. So Muslims were embarrassed by the story, but the earliest writers just couldn't avoid it. By the time we get to the major hadith collections, centuries after Muhammad, Muslims were actively removing embarrassing material from their records. What's interesting is that even the hadith compilers kept parts of the story that they liked while ignoring the part about Muhammad delivering revelations from Satan. For instance, in Sahih al-Bukhari 4862, we read, narrated Ibn Abbas, the Prophet performed a prostration when he finished reciting Surat an-Najm, Surah 53, which contained the satanic verses when Muhammad revealed it, and all the Muslims and al-Mushrikun, polytheists, pagans, idolaters, and disbelievers in the oneness of Allah and in His Messenger Muhammad, and jinn, and human beings prostrated along with him. Wow! Why would pagans and idolaters bow down when Muhammad finished reciting a surah? Bukhari adds a heading suggesting it's because Surah 53 concludes with a verse that says, so fall you down in prostration to Allah and worship Him alone. Alone isn't in the Arabic. But why would pagans and idolaters who rejected Muhammad bow down in response to a Quranic verse telling them to bow down? It doesn't make sense. They didn't believe in Muhammad's revelations. So why did they bow down? Well, we know from Muslim sources that came long before Bukhari exactly why they bowed down. They bowed down because Muhammad showed reverence for their gods. They bowed down in honor of Muhammad promoting polytheism. Later, he changed it so that it affirms monotheism. Bukhari likes the part about the pagans and idolaters bowing down when they heard the Quran, but he doesn't like the part about why they bowed down. So he keeps the part he likes and rejects the part he doesn't like. This is exactly what Muslims do today. History is like a buffet to many Muslims. If you like something, you take it. If you don't like something, you leave it. Think about this. Muhammad delivers a surah promoting polytheism. Then he changes it so that it only promotes monotheism. Then Muslim historians record what happened. Then later Muslim historians water down the story. Then still later Muslim historians erase the story. And Muslims today insist that the story is just a lie, and they condemn the early Muslims who recorded it because they knew it was true. Islam is the supreme example of how not to do history. For those of us who actually want to know what happened, the story of the satanic verses is as strong as history gets when it comes to the life of Muhammad. If Muhammad's followers could invent something like this and deceive the entire early Muslim community, how can we trust anything they say about Muhammad? If his followers would invent stories that make him look bad and hurt his credibility, they obviously wouldn't have any problem inventing more positive stories. In other words, if you're going to throw the early Muslim community under the bus, that's the same community that gives us everything we know about Muhammad. And it's the same community that was protecting the Quran. If they were a bunch of liars, there goes Islam. So, based on Muslim sources, we know that the Prophet of Islam, on at least one occasion, delivered a message that didn't come from God. We also know that Muhammad, on at least one occasion, spoke in the names of false gods. Putting this together with the criteria for recognizing false prophets in Deuteronomy 18:20, we have the following syllogisms, which I call the Deuteronomy deductions. First syllogism. 1. If a person speaks in the names of false gods, that person is a false prophet. We know this from Deuteronomy 18:20. 2. Muhammad spoke in the name of false gods. We know this from numerous Muslim sources. 3. Therefore, Muhammad was a false prophet. Second syllogism. 1. If a person delivers a revelation that doesn't come from God, that person is a false prophet. We know this from Deuteronomy 18:20. 2. Muhammad delivered a revelation that didn't come from God. We know this from numerous Muslim sources. 3. Therefore, Muhammad was a false prophet. How can Muslims avoid the conclusion of these arguments? As we've seen, they can reject the first premise of each argument by throwing out everything Allah and Muhammad said about the Torah, and by rejecting one of the most common arguments of their top apologists, and by claiming that it's perfectly acceptable for a prophet to deliver a revelation from the devil. If our Muslim friends go this route, I'm afraid that we can't take Allah or Muhammad or Muslim apologists seriously, which means that we can't take Islam seriously. Alternatively, Muslims can reject the second premise of each argument by claiming that Muhammad never delivered the satanic verses. Here again, if our Muslim friends go this route, we can't take the Quran seriously since verses of the Quran were revealed as a response to Muhammad delivering the satanic verses, and we can't take Muhammad seriously because we can't know anything about him since the only people who passed on information about him were, according to Muslims, the biggest bunch of liars who've ever walked the planet. So, my Muslim friends, we can either accept the Deuteronomy deductions and go over the evidence points, in which case we have to reject Muhammad, or we can reject the arguments and deny the evidence, in which case we still have to reject Muhammad. Either way, we have to reject Muhammad. I know this is hard to hear, but when you follow a false prophet, you need to hear it. You need to hear that, according to your earliest sources, your prophet couldn't tell the difference between a revelation from God and a revelation from Satan, and that this makes him a false prophet, according to God's true prophets. Here's the irony. You claim that you respect Moses, but if Muhammad had delivered the satanic verses in the time of Moses, Moses would have ordered the people to pick up stones and stone him to death as a false prophet. Fortunately for Muhammad, he recited the satanic verses among pagans who praised him for promoting shirk and polytheism. But I will not praise him, and no one who loves God and hates idolatry can accept this man as a prophet of the Almighty.